Good morning, church. Well, as Andre said, this is our final sermon in our Moral and the Story series. And I might be a little biased, but I think it's been an awesome sermon series. You can't really argue with that either, because then you're saying, I don't like the parables of Jesus. So here we are. And it's very fitting that this would be the last parable in this series, because according to the Gospel of Matthew, this was Jesus' last parable that he taught, that we have recorded, at least in the Gospel of Matthew. And so we're in Matthew chapter 25, starting in verse 31. It's also fitting that it's the last one because he's also talking about the end of time and the return of Jesus and all of his glory. So let's just start right at it in verse 31. But when the Son of Man comes in his glory and all his angels with him, then he will sit on his glorious throne, and all the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate them from one another, just as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. Let's stop right there. So what Jesus has been doing is he's been building up to this moment. In fact, the beginning of Matthew chapter 25, he shares the parable of the bridegroom and the virgins. And the point being, you've got to be ready at all times. You don't know when he's coming back. And Jesus, through the parable, is described as this groom. And then he goes right into the parable of the talents. And Jesus is the master who has entrusted his servants. And the servants don't know when he's coming back. But when he comes back, there's an expectation. There's an accounting, there's an expectation that they've done something with what they've been given, with the time and the resources that they were entrusted with. And now we go right into the parable of the sheep and the goats. And this time, instead of Jesus just saying the bridegroom or just saying the master, he gets right to the point. There's not a lot of imagery here other than the fact that it's the Son of Man. When the Son of Man returns in all of his glory and he sits upon his throne, it's very, very clear who Jesus is referring to here. So that being said, you could almost say that that's not exactly a parable, at least not like the others. It's more of a prophecy. It's really both. And this imagery of the sheep and the goats is really the image of this parable. So let's continue. Verse 33, and he will put the sheep on his right, but the goats on the left. Then the king will say to those on his right, come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in, naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me. Then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty or give you something to drink? And when did we see you as a stranger and invite you in, or naked and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and come to you? And the king will answer and say to them, truly I say to you, to the extent that you did it for one of the least of these brothers or sisters of mine, you did it for me. Then he will also say to those on the left, depart from me, you accursed people, into the eternal fire, which has been prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me nothing to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not invite me in. Naked, and you did not clothe me. Sick and in prison, and you did not visit me. Then they themselves also will answer, Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty, or as a stranger or naked or sick or in prison, and did not take care of you? Then he will answer them, truly, I say to you, to the extent that you did not do it for one of the least of these, you did not do it for me either. These will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous into eternal life. Now, for his audience, they're very familiar with the concept of shepherding, very familiar with the concept of sheep and goats. The contrast and comparison, the difference and the similarities of sheep and goats would not be lost on his audience. It might be a little more lost on us today. And I don't have time to go into all the differences. That could be an entire sermon. And we can make all these different points of those differences. But let's at least talk about the main one. I think it was said really well in the children's Bible that Manny read so well for us earlier. But basically, think of it this way. The sheep are in relationship with the shepherd. Jesus says, I am the good shepherd. My sheep know me, I know them. They know my voice, they follow me. I look after them, I care for them. And so the sheep are in relationship with the shepherd. They've come under his authority. They are led and guided. They follow the shepherd. They know him, he knows them. The goats, however, kind of go their own way. The goats have rejected the authority of the shepherd. They're not interested in following the shepherd. They're hard-headed. They're just going to do their own thing. Now, I want us to grasp those two concepts as we move forward. And one thing that's extremely important for us to realize is think about all that Jesus has done in his ministry and his time on earth and his time that's recorded for us in the Gospels. And think about all the different miracles he's performed and all the things that he's done for people to God's glory. Jesus was very great at doing this, at being the and, as we often say here. He took care of people's physical needs and spiritual. He did both. He didn't seem to get those two out of whack. He healed the blind and the lame and the crippled and those who couldn't speak and those with leprosy. He healed these people, but he also healed those who were spiritually oppressed by demons. He freed those oppressed by demonic spirits and under spiritual oppression. He didn't just preach and preach and preach and preach and preach and give people the bread of life, the very word of God. He didn't just give them that. He looked at the crowds and had compassion for them because he saw they were hungry. They needed actual food. And he multiplied the loaves and the fishes. And he took care of those who were hungry. He didn't just raise us up spiritually to new life and the resurrection. He also raised the physically dead. He did both. And I think that's really important. We're going to unpack a little more of that in just a moment. One of the really important aspects of being a sheep, according to this parable, is the witness that we are for Christ. Our witness in the world is so much more powerful when we're meeting the needs of the people around us. It's such a powerful witness. I want to tell you the story. I've shared his story before in other contexts, but my friend Yagya, he's from Nepal. He walked into our campus center and he saw the sign. This was about 5 years ago, early into my time here. He saw the sign on our building, Christian Campus Community. And he walked through our doors and he said, hey, I don't know much about Christians. I just know you guys help people a lot and I need help. That was about the extent of it. It's about all he knew. That's about all he needed to know at that point. And so that started a conversation which led to a friendship, which led to a lot of study. But basically, he'd come from Nepal, and he'd noticed there's so many Hindu temples everywhere. Very, very nice, elaborate, beautiful Hindu temples everywhere. But his country is riddled with problems. Poverty, extreme poverty. There's people who lack the shelter and the warm clothes they need for the rugged and very harsh Himalayan climate. And there's people that don't have access to clean food and water. And there's sex trafficking, human trafficking is horrible there. And he's looking around asking this question, being raised Hindu, like, what are the temples, what are the Hindu people doing to fix this stuff? He said, but what I realized was everywhere I looked, where there were schools being built, where there were orphanages being built, where people were being taken care of, where water wells were being dug, where there were food programs, where there were nonprofits coming in to combat trafficking and were setting captives of that horrible thing free. He said it was Christians. It was Christian missionaries. It was Christian nonprofits. It was churches coming over there and getting planted. It was the Christians who were making an impact in my country. Then he asked this question: why would people do that? Why would people leave to come to a country that's got so many problems, where living is very difficult, to help people they don't even know? I want to know why. And I remember clearly taking them to Matthew 25. I took him to the greatest commands, to love God and love others, and I took him to Matthew 25. I'm sure I took him to some other places, but I remember those two specifically. And I remember so much his response. I want that. I want that. I want to be a part of that, where people recognize they're serving God by serving his people. That started Yaga and his wife Narmit on a path to follow Jesus. And I'm so thankful today that they are following the Lord, that they're raising their children to follow Jesus. They've got a heart. He's working now in the banking business with a PhD in economics, and he's got a heart to go back to his home country to make some significant differences, both physically and spiritually. And I got to reflecting on this just last night. It kind of hit me. I thought, of all the missionaries, all the nonprofits, all the churches, all the efforts being done in Nepal, and none of them have any idea about my friend Yaga. They have no idea about the ripple effect, they don't know that fruit. They don't know his story yet. Maybe some of them will be aware. But it's beautiful, the impact that it makes on our world for Christ and for his kingdom when we actually do what Jesus is saying to do. I read a book a few years ago by Richard Stearns called A Hole in Our Gospel, or The Hole in Our Gospel. He's the president of World Vision, and they're doing wonderful things in our world to combat all these terrible things that we just mentioned before. And he mentions in this book, or one of the main points of this book, is how we've kind of swung the pendulum too far in one direction. So if you think about church history and you think about the Reformation many, many years ago, and it was all about earning your salvation and works, and Martin Luther comes and says, no, it's about grace, and grace is what saves us, and faith is what saves us, and it's absolutely right, absolutely right. Then we kind of swing the pendulum a little too far, where it's only about faith and grace and spiritual salvation. And when we think about evangelism and we think about let's fill a stadium full of people or an auditorium full of people and get a great orator up there to present an awesome, powerful message of the gospel and then just get people to sign up, yes, I want to follow Jesus. We may go to the extent of baptizing them, maybe. But when Jesus gave his final words to the apostles, he's saying, go into all the world and make disciples, people who follow Jesus, people who are the sheep in this parable, people who are doing what Jesus does, and teach them to do all that I've commanded you to do. It's a discipleship process. Do you really think God's heart for this world, for this broken, dark, evil world, do you think his hope is that we all just kind of have a thief on the cross experience? Lord, have mercy on me. Remember me. Let me go to heaven. And that's the extent of it? That's kind of crazy if you think about it. Can Jesus save the thief on the cross? Can he give you that salvation on that deathbed confession? Of course he can. That's the power of his grace and his mercy and the power of faith and belief, but should we just stop there? And for the early church, there was this big struggle of understanding faith and works and which is which, and Paul is having to fight so much legalism and so much of the Judaizing ideologies that are creeping into the church and reminding them that we're free in Christ, that salvation that's by faith and through by grace and through faith alone. But it doesn't stop there. So that we can do the works that God has called us to do. Peter, James, and the other apostles are helping, are later in the other epistles helping to get that pendulum more centered by reminding us that faith without works is dead. Be doers of the word, not just hearers of the word. Jesus says, why do you call me Lord and you don't do what I say to do? We've got a big theological issue when it comes to being the sheep Jesus is describing in this parable, and it's a problem. It's a problem. There's another issue I want to tackle. So we've got a big theological problem that we got to get more in line with Christ's heart for this broken world. That's a better balance of the spiritual and the physical, of meeting those needs and blessing people. We've got to get that more in line. But the other issue is our lifestyle. We've got a huge lifestyle cultural issue holding us back and keeping us from doing what Jesus is talking about in this passage. And before I just come out with what that problem is, let's go back to another parable that we've tackled a couple of times actually in our series. It's the parable of the Good Samaritan, Luke 10. I just want to read the first couple of verses here. Luke 10, 30 and through 32. Jesus replied and said, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he encountered robbers, and they stripped him and beat him and went away, leaving him half dead. And by coincidence, a priest was going down on that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. Likewise, a Levite, also when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. Now, hopefully you remember the rest of this story. A Samaritan, very despised by the Jews, who would have been very looked down upon by the priest and the Levite. He's also on a journey. He also has places to be and things to do. He may not have the clout and the prestige of the Levite and the priest, but he's got a place to get to, but he stops. He's moved by compassion. He goes above and beyond to help this person who's been a victim. And Jesus says, this is the neighbor. When we talk about loving our neighbor as ourselves, this is the neighbor. Go and do likewise. Be like the Good Samaritan. But you know, there's something about that Levite and that priest that we all identify with. We're in a hurry. I got places to get to. Me personally, I'm usually supposed to already be there. We're a little behind. It's a problem. A very fast-paced culture that we live in, an overly busy culture, makes it really difficult to be a good Samaritan. There was a study done, an experiment, I think it was in the 70s, and it was done at the Princeton Theological with the Princeton Theological Seminary students. They were given an assignment to preach a sermon on the Good Samaritan. And it was going to be a big grade. It was a very important assignment. And so in this experiment, they had all the participants who had prepared for this Good Samaritan sermon, and they were in one building. And the building that they were going to give their sermon in was on the complete other side of campus. And they split these participants up into three groups. Those who were considered high hurry, those that were considered intermediate hurry, and those that were considered low hurry. And so what they did for this experiment is they came into the room where they were all gathered and they said, hey guys, we got you in these groups. Group A, we got bad news. You were already supposed to be there. You are already late. The people who are grading you on this assignment, on this Good Samaritan sermon, the people they have been waiting. You got to get there now. Go. And so they rush them out the door and they take off across campus. Well, planted halfway between the two places was someone in distress, someone in need of help. For the second group, the intermediate hurry, they said, hey, you're not late like the other group, but you need to get there as quick as you can because you're going soon. So go now. And for the third group, they said, hey, you guys are good. You got plenty of time, but go ahead and leave now just to be safe. And so it was interesting. Here's the breakdown. It shouldn't be much of a surprise. For the high hurry group, only 10% stopped to check on the person in distress. Only 10% stopped to help. 90% of the people passed right by so they could hurry up and give a sermon about the Good Samaritan. I got to be honest, I was nervous on my drive here this morning. It's like, Lord, please let everybody's cars work good today. Let everybody, no flat tires, please. Those in intermediate hurry, 45% stopped to offer help. Those with low hurry, those who had plenty of time, 63% stopped to help. Either way, that's pretty sad, right? All those percentages, all those groups, pretty sad. So we got to hurry up and go preach that Good Samaritan sermon. I don't have time to be a Good Samaritan myself. Let me tell you, one of the hardest things about preaching, it's not preparing, it's not delivering, it's practicing what I am preaching. And Lord, help me practice what I am preaching this morning. I read about that study in a book called Addicted to Busy by Brady Boyd. I think I've got an image up here on the screen for it. I highly, highly recommend it. Awesome book, very convicting book. I read it a few years ago, and I got to reread it this past year because Heather picked it up and started reading it, and she, like, every time I turned around, oh, honey, listen to this. This is so good. So I got to reread it, which was awesome. In addition to that book, back a few years ago, my great-grandmother passed away, and I got to go through all of her books and pick out the ones I wanted. And I came across this interesting little book. It was really simple. Nothing flashy about it. It looked old. It was called The Majesty of Calmness. And I put it over here in the discard stack. I wasn't that interested. But I got curious. I wonder, what is this about, the majesty of calmness? You know, like, what is that about? So I pick it up and I look at the table of contents, and there's a chapter. One of the chapter headings was called Hurry, the Scourge of America. And I thought, I think I want to read this. So I read that one chapter, and man, this guy is just hitting the nail on the head. He's like, man, one of our biggest problems in this country is that we're in way too much of a hurry. We are entirely too busy, and it's affecting every aspect of our lives. We got people with major indigestion issues because we eat too fast, and we're too stressed out, and we got stomach problems. And I'm like, yes, that. It's like we got major family issues and family problems because dads are working and not being dads, not being husbands. The family unit is suffering because mom and dad are running frantically, trying to make more money and go. It's a breakdown in our society. And he goes on and on. He even gets after education. Education, man, we just pump these kids full of information as fast as we can and push them right on through. He goes off on all these issues and the moral decline of our nation due to this hurry. And then I got curious because there were a lot of words in there I had to look up. When was this thing written? I about fell out of my chair when I saw that this book was written in 1900. 1900. 1900, and this man is revealing these issues with our fast-paced lives and busy schedules. The Wright brothers hadn't got an airplane off the ground yet. The telephone had been invented. Nobody had one. The automobile had been invented. Again, nobody had one. What would he think of our lives today? Crazy. It's crazy. And this is a whole other sermon because it's one of the biggest hurdles for us to care for the hungry, the thirsty, the sick, the imprisoned, those without clothing, the things that Jesus himself is constantly tending to and calling us to do the same. It's a huge problem. And that's a big time problem when you have a whole lifestyle, cultural issue and a big theological issue, keeping us from doing the very foundation of what we're called to do as Jesus followers. We've got to do some things to overcome these hurdles. And man, I feel like the last person equipped to harp on being busy. Our family, this has been the busiest year we've ever had. And we've come to the point where we're saying enough's enough. And we've got to quit some things. We've got to stop some things. We've got to reevaluate, reprioritize. And thank the Lord it is summer. It's officially summer in the Bell House. But one thing we're doing, and I'm hoping this sermon helps really convict us, is let's reevaluate some things on our schedule for the future. And let's start planning some things with our girls with this extra time to go and serve and to volunteer and to help and to be a blessing to people, because we can't just expect that it's just naturally going to happen until we rearrange some schedules and we cancel some stuff and we prioritize. And I hope and my prayer is that we can all do the same. I think there's a huge application for us individually. There's a huge application for us collectively as a church. I'm so thankful that I'm a part of a church who right now I know, because of what we've come together, pulling our resources and our passions. We've come together, and right now in Tanzania, right now in Haiti, there are people drinking clean, fresh water because of what God has done through us. I love that there are people right here in our own community that aren't going hungry right now because they came by the food pantry on Thursday and not only received a bag of food, met some beautiful people who encountered them with the love of Jesus. I'm thankful that we have moms that have been through some tough stuff that are getting some really, really meaningful encouragement and help. Arms of hope. I'm so thankful right now we got people in a country I can't even say right now because we're online. We've got a go team in a country trying to reach refugees, trying to bring the hope and love of Jesus where it's not very well received, and that there are more trips coming. I'm thankful that we're not just simply settling for, hey, let's just show up here and have some encouraging time for an hour. Because I think it's really easy to slip into that. That's what church is all about. It's about what we do in this space for an hour. We are missing the point severely if that's what we settle for. But I think we can do a whole lot more. I think we can do a whole lot more, and it's clear that our world is in need of the church to do a whole lot more. Where you see a hospital, where you see a school, where you see an orphanage, you see the work of the church in the past. In the past, the church has had that kind of impact on society. And now we've got the resources, we've got the technology. Sky's the limit on what God can do with the Holy Spirit empowering his church to be the sheep and not the goats. I want to leave you with this final thought as we close. I believe it's really amazing that Jesus, in his time in the flesh, his time here on earth with us, identifies with every person he just mentions in this parable. He knows exactly what it's like to be hungry. Remember that whole 40 days and 40 nights in the desert fasting just to get tempted by Satan? He knows what it's like to be thirsty. One of his final words while on the cross, I thirst. He knows what it's like to be naked. The artist renditions of the crucifixion scene don't really do it justice. He wasn't covered. It's part of the shamefulness of death on the cross. It's being stripped naked. Soldiers casting lots for your clothes as you hang there, dying, gasping for air. He knows what it's like to be a stranger. He knows what it's like to be homeless, living, moving from place to place, with nowhere to call home during his time in ministry. He knows what it's like to be a prisoner. He knows what it's like to be put on trial, to suffer injustice. We don't get a story of Jesus having the common cold or the flu, but he lived for 33 years on this planet. I know he got sick at some point. But he was certainly beaten, scourged, crucified on a cross. He identifies with every one of these situations. And he identifies with those going through it now. And he receives the glory and the honor and the worship when we can be the hands and feet in Jesus and serve people in these desperate situations. I think it's amazing that we serve a God who is so holy, almighty, and all-powerful, so far above us, but he can recognize with compassion, he can sympathize with those in the darkest, deepest places. That's the kind of God we serve. If you're ready to serve that kind of God, if you're ready to put your faith in action, he's ready to receive you as we stand and sing.